when you allow them to represent what is inside them genetically as far as instinct, they are take 2 steps and take 1 bite, take 2 steps and take 1 bite, take 1 step and take, they're always moving. There's a body orientation that's general in a direction while they're getting their belly full. These animals, prehistorically, even, the aurochs they came from, they were always moving. They were always like moving to select new graze. And, part of it was to allow them the chance to experience 100% nutritive choice that was determined by palates.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Glenn Elzinga, an Idaho cattle rancher that's been a strong voice for the Real Organic movement from the beginning. Glenn and his wife Carol and 7 daughters utilize a technique called in-herding to accompany their herd on horseback, moving them across public lands as they graze, and keeping them out of riparian areas while sleeping beside them under the stars for the summer months. This way of managing a grazing herd allows for a positive transformation of the ecosystem by reinvigorating plant and animal species who are symbiotic partners to grasslands and moving cattle through with their quick and mild disturbance at a pace that keeps them moving much like the bison did on this landscape. So the cattle may graze on any given area for a few minutes over 5 years. This is in stark contrast to what most cattle outfits are doing on public lands, which is releasing their animals unattended for months at a time and allowing them to destructively overgraze and contaminate the waterways. Glenn and his family are proof that a better way exists, especially as we tackle big subjects like the impact of animal agriculture on climate and rewilding. This interview is from a recent visit that Glenn made to Dave Chapman's farm in Vermont. Glenn also took the stage at our Churchtown conference this past fall, and this TED-style talk was featured in the second symposium of our 2024 symposium in defensive biology. Tickets are still available to watch the recordings if you missed it. Visit realorganicproject.org to watch the preview and find out all the details.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm very happy to be talking with Glenn Elzinga, my friend from Idaho, a rancher who just does extraordinary things and is very generous sharing it with the rest of us. Glenn, I just got to hear you give that talk 2 days ago at the conference at Churchtown, and it was the most beautiful thing that you presented of this life. And I know it's not the sound of music. I mean, I know that, the real life has got its serious challenges like every real life, but you do live in a beautiful place that smells good.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
No, we get to work in beauty.
Yeah.
That's for sure, Dave.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not always beautiful feeling, but it is beautiful. And I gotta tell you right now, it's my daughters who are really gifted at capturing that on, they actually bring a decent camera with them because they know it's important to capture that because it's unique. It's just a unique place. Yeah. And I think part of it for them really is not just to represent it, but I think there's this respect in all of them to represent it right.
Yeah.
Because of the beauty of it, so it becomes so much a part of them that it's like, no, you don't bring a cell phone up here and capture. Yeah, they do. All of them take cell phone pictures too.
Yeah.
But you don't bring, a cell phone to, the coronation of King Charles or whatever, it's kind of a different vibe, but, they have this respect for the land and they want to represent it right.
Yeah. So help people, I hope that everyone's going to listen to your talks. They're going to learn a lot of this, but give me a little bit of a context. How many acres is it that your ranch occupies?
So it's about 3,000 acres deeded, but we actually say it's a 50,000 acre ranch because we actually control 50,000 acres. It's leased ground from the U.S. Forest Service and the BLM. They're both government agencies, and there's some state land in there too. And mixed in all that is our private ground.
You took a picture of this vista
Yeah.
that went into the mountains in the distance, and
Yeah.
you said all this is part of
that was a cool picture because I was like looking for one in that talk that I could kind of represent that, just to get, somebody says 50,000 acres and you're really not cognizant of what that means. And, I could convert that to miles and say, oh, it's 75 square miles, and that sounds cool. But it's really meaningless because, people, in order to get the visual, you need a visual, right? You don't just go visualize 70 square miles or 47,000 plus 3,000 acres. So anyway, I wanted to pick that one picture and I found that one. Melanie took that of me, and we were on a scouting mission. We're way ahead of the crew and about 450 head of cattle. And it was she and I just traveling across what we call the tablelands. It's called the Larkspur tablelands. It's this kind of unique area on that grazing country. And, I haven't been up there for many years. I've been working in that country for probably, it's been 35 years. And we came over that break that day. I was riding ahead of her on horseback, and David, it just still took my breath. It took my breath away.
Yeah.
I can't even put words on it. It just really gets under your skin because you start to learn, and the more you get to know, it's like being married to somebody for 35, 40. I talked to a couple that was married 65 years the other day, and there's nothing superficial. It's very intimate. And that's the way it's become with this piece of country, because, I can mention a rock out in the middle of 100% nowhere, or a given Douglas fir tree out in the middle of 100% nowhere to one of my kids. And guess what? They know the rock, or they know the tree. Anyway, this picture was unique because it went all the way to the skyline, and, from one side of the image to the other. And everything on it, everything in that picture, all the way to the horizon line, miles and miles away, was part of this piece of country.
So one of the things I really got from your talk was this message that you and your family and the animals that you manage and take care of are part of the ecosystem of that land.
Yeah.
It's not like the ecosystem is separate.
Yeah.
You are woven into that ecosystem, and you seem to have a pretty clear understanding that your choices strongly impact that large span of land.
For sure, and David, we didn't always have that. It's all about what's happening up here, really. If you're working on 3 acres, or you're working on 50,000 acres or 100,000 acres, it really is about, where your mind is in regard to that relationship over what you have to work with. And I won't even say what you're managing, because that would be like way too limiting for me to say we're managing this ground, because the ground ends up managing us to a lot of degree when we get our head right. So what we were doing early on was we were actually trying to say, oh, we're going to put cattle up here, and we're going to graze this, and we're going to graze that, and we're going to try to manage these riparian ecosystems to try to get them to function while trying to get our cattle to gain weight. And the uplands, we're going to use this stubble height criteria to measure how much we graze here, and we're going to calculate out, and it's going to be like 25, 30, 40 pounds per acre to start with. Hopefully we'll get to 100 pounds per acre, and stocking rate, you got all these metrics and all this stuff. And we came to a point, my wife and I, to this place where all of that just fell along the wayside. In fact, I was in a discussion with a bunch of scientists in Montana the other day, and they started using those terms. They started using terms like stocking rate and pounds of dry matter per acre and, average daily gains and all these cool things, which are super valuable metrics, But they were talking about a wild landscape. And, these landscapes before we came along were so wild that a bison would come by, and it might be 50,000 head of bison run across this piece of ground in 3 days, and they annihilate it. They eat every blade of grass. I've read trappers' journals where, like this guy was coming up this canyon. It was very close to us, just a few miles away, and he was coming up this canyon with his pack string. It was 1824, and he's leading his pack string, and it's this tight canyon in Idaho's Rocky Mountains. He's surrounded by these canyon walls, and all of a sudden he feels a breath of hot, humid air. And his horses start getting really unsettled. They start jostling. He's got them in a pack string. He's leading them with lead ropes. They start jostling around and looking behind. They're nervous. They start just waving, from side to side with their feet. And he knows something's up. And all of a sudden, something triggered in his head. And he said, bison. They called them buffalo in those days. He's like, buffalo. He knew. Buffalo. He galloped with his pack string to a big Doug fir tree and tied his horses all to low branches on the tree and climbed up the tree because he knew he had to be free. He had to be free and clear of the ground. And sure enough, that hot wind hit him like a ton of bricks and, with this huge fervor and odor of animals. And the leaders came through, and it was like 100 bison wide in the bottom of this canyon, and they just stampeded right by him. He was stuck in a tree for the entire day into the next day. He spent the night in this tree while this herd ran by. And so I went there, and I was like, I'm going to calculate this. I'm going to figure it out. So I found out how fast they go, and, I just figured a trot. I didn't even figure a gallop. I just figured a trot, take that and, square root of 9 times 42 times divide by, whatever. I just did the numbers and how many bison you could fit conceivably across there if they were in stampede, and the time frames he talked about. And minimum number I could come up with was about 400,000 head of bison ran by this guy. Anyway, the dust settles a little bit and there's a few stragglers coming by. He gets on his horse again and starts riding. Horses are hungry and thirsty, and there's a creek nearby. It's a mud hole, and they try to get a drink out of it. Anyway, he rides over into the next valley, which is ours, and he's thinking, we're going to graze over there because this canyon bottom is annihilated. He never found a blade of grass. I mean, this is a big valley, Dave. This valley is 45 miles long by 10 miles wide, 100% annihilated. Everything is eaten down it's like it burned, except it wasn't black. These bison, it's 400,000 head, they just torched it and moved on. And so, when I got context of that, like in form of disturbance of our ecosystems, I'm realizing all bets are off as far as your metrics. It's all meaningless because it's a wild ecosystem. And what the reality is anything can happen with these grazers. I mean, it might be 25, 30 years before these bison come back, or it might be 2 years from now. We have no idea. Maybe we have an average return interval of 10 to 20 years. I don't know. So that's the kind of things we started to try to figure out is how can we emulate nature and these episodic events with how we manage and how we influence this ecosystem. And that shift of thinking then would take us to a place where we're now part of an ecosystem instead of acting upon it. We're trying to mirror what these plants, the conditions that these plants have adapted under. These riparian systems, the creeks and the springs and the ponds and the lakes, all those things, they adapted under certain sort of criteria, whether it's episodic events like this, or maybe it's just the nighthawks coming back every year. They come back every year at a certain time. Every year, within a 1 week period, the nighthawks are back. It's like somebody turns on a switch, boom, they're back. So there's all these different layers of functionality in the ecosystem. And what we realize is that we just want to emulate one part of that. And as a result, hopefully we're trying to be part of that ecosystem now instead of influence it.
And the impact of that in your experience has been clearly that the ecosystem is changing in ways that you would consider very positive.
Oh, heck yeah.
Right?
Yeah, no, incredible.
Yeah,
very incredible change. It's like even something, esoteric and out of reach as soil organic matter, as near as we can tell, on those dry, this is semi-desert rain shadow environment, like probably mid-range precipitation at mid-elevation in the sagebrush ocean part of the ecosystem is, it's somewhere around 15 inches a year. And we had a gal named Nicole Masters. She's an agroecologist from New Zealand. She actually lived with us for a while up there. And she was horseback with us on the crew quite a bit. And we just had Nicole's fantastic because she doesn't take life too seriously and she laughs a lot. So that's very good in our situation. That makes for a great day with Nicole. But anyway, we're out there and she's actually got this protocol for measuring land health. And we took that protocol and we applied it to a community system that is very vulnerable to this long-term grazing, this long-term continuous grazing effect that people have put on this ecosystem. Remember, it's not a part of the ecosystem, it's an influence on the ecosystem. And so this has been 150 years of continuous grazing. People just stuck their cattle out there and then they'd go find them in the fall and bring them home, bring them home to the valley where the ranch was. And they'd throw them in the mountains every year, did this for about 150 years. And it was a lot of cattle for quite a while. It was thousands of head of cattle. And it completely changed the balance of plant communities up there. So now we've changed to a very, very short duration, high intensity grazing paradigm that's separated by an average of 3.5 to 4 years. So sometimes, like this year, most of the country we graze hadn't been grazed for 12 years. And some of this stuff we grazed just 3 years ago, that we passed through. So there's quite a bit of variability. Remember, like the bison could be extremely variable, but yet, we're looking at an average of somewhere between 4 and 6 years. And the other thing about it is we're using this high intensity, short duration. So it's actually measured in minutes. The amount of time we spend on a given acre of ground is maybe 2 to 4 minutes for the total 4-year period.
Right.
So,
and that's bringing a herd of like 400, 450 cattle in for 4.5 minutes.
Yes, and you're just moving through. And it's not like they're running or anything. They just got their heads down and they're continuously grazing. But this is the way, when you allow animals to represent what's inside them, they're instinctual grazers. When you allow them to represent what is inside them genetically as far as instinct, they are take 2 steps and take 1 bite, take 2 steps and take 1 bite, take 1 step and take, they're always moving. There's a body orientation that's general in a direction while they're getting their belly full. These animals, prehistorically, even, the aurochs they came from, they were always moving. They were always like moving to select new graze. And, part of it was to allow them the chance to experience 100% nutritive choice that was determined by palates. So these animals all have a palate. We think cows are dumb stereotypically, and I actually think there's some humans that are dumber than cows. After I've really met a cow at his or her own terms and allowed them this thing of full nutritional choice. They're very discretionary about what they eat, but we as humans have reductionalized this, especially in terms of feedlot, but even in pasture systems, we put them on these monocultures, or maybe it's a polyculture with only 5 species or something like that. And as a result, they can't really self-regulate and follow what their palate is. They're just trying to get their belly full. It's like, we're just going to give you spaghetti every day as a human, and it's going to get your belly full. But of course you're yearning for all these other things and all these other flavors and, chemicals probably to experience in your palate and tastes and, but no, we're just going to give you spaghetti, and maybe we're going to give you some iceberg lettuce every day, and that'll give you the greens and the fiber you need, plus you'll get some carbohydrates. Let's not worry about protein right now because we're trying to put weight on you. So, that's kind of, in a microcosmic way, the way we've treated cattle and the way we've made them become. And what we've realized is that we need to kind of reboot that instinct of following their palate. Because when they have their own nutritive choice, and it's through biodiversity, a biodiversity of huge food choices in front of them, they're going to be able to self-regulate their own wellness. And that's where it becomes super exciting to start seeing that take off. So it's not only taking off in the ecosystem, but it's taking off in our animals themselves.
So this is really interesting. Of course, you're saying the greater the diversity, then the wisdom starts to come of making the intelligent choice for that animal. Yes. And in a pasture with 5 species, they can't make such choices. They still make some, and in a feedlot, they can't make any choice at all.
Yeah, it's over. Yep.
And they just eat what's there and eat a lot of it.
Yes.
And it's not healthy for them.
No, it's not. It's manifested by acidosis. You start getting lesions in their guts, ulceration. Fact is, a lot of feedlot cattle are going to die soon on their own just because of sickness. They're going to start developing all these characteristics of, the high acid environment they're grazing on, which is corn, or maybe it's ground barley, beet pulp, maybe it's even, really weird things to try to supply roughage like newspaper waste or whatever. There's all kinds of, when you want to talk about what's fed to conventional beef cows and feedlots, like for me, the worst one of all is this dry distillers grains. It's probably one of the most common feedstuffs, and these are byproducts of ethanol production. And they're just not healthy. They're just, it's an extremely dicey thing to feed without trying to figure out how to mitigate the toxic effects of dry distillers grains. And yet, most cows in the United States, most cows and steers, heifers, that are in a finishing paradigm, trying to get fat on, are fed that. And you need an animal nutritionist to figure out how not to kill your cow, when you're feeding this. So, to me, that's the reductionist fully end of falling off the cliff spectrum versus what we do, where we just say, no, girls, here's 2,500 different plant species, or guys, you choose what you want. What's really crazy, Dave, is we buy some organic grass-finished cattle from a few other producers. Most of them now we raise from calves, but it takes a lot to both raise the babies on your own place, as well as take them all the way to finish. So, for years, that was our predominant input. Was we bought grass-fed organic cattle from producers in Montana. They were great people, friends of ours, but a lot of them came from prairie ecosystems. So these yearling cattle would come into our place, and my girls noticed this first. We take them up to our grazing country with our other cattle, and we saw these yearling cattle walking around aimlessly. There's tons of plants in that low country that they enter in when they come off the ranch. And they're walking around out there, and they're just they're not eating, you know, and you're like, what's happening? And then I think it was Melanie started noticing this phenomena. So we had some older animals there too, you know, that you know, been with us forever. And we're there for, you know, this is their second year up on the range, or maybe, you know, coming into their third. And so these younger cattle would go and put their head right next to where this cow was grazing, because they got up there and they've been looking forward to it. They were actually looking forward to going up there, because I think it's because of nutritional diversity. I mean, we have a lot of cool choice at home. We have about 85 species on our home pastures, but it's like they start like looking for the gate when the weather starts changing. They know it's time. It's time. And for them, it's like, I think it's this time of unparalleled choice. And for a cow, that's paradise. Have unparalleled choice. And they're already very comfortable with us. And so we can ride a horseback. You can't walk onto the ground right next to them, because it's different. It's, you know, when you're on horseback, they feel like you're part of them. When you're on foot, you're human. So you're riding up to them right on horseback. They got their heads down, and right next to them is one of these yearling cattle. And son of a gun, it's only a few days of this. We call it nutritional training. These young cattle will put their heads next to the older animal and will start taking bites. I mean, they are right next to, it'd be like you sitting at a dinner table at a restaurant and you just putting your mouth right next to somebody else's plate and, you know, taking their fork from their hand and just shoveling, you know, it's equivalent to that. And it's kind of weird, but, you know, they didn't trust their own discretion to know what was good and what it wasn't. But they would trust another bovine to show them and tell them. And, you know, within 2 days, their bellies were now full. And it was just because of this nutritional training that the others showed them.
That's a very important thing, Glenn, obviously, that, yeah, there's instinct here.
Yes.
But there's also learned, acquired knowledge.
It's huge. It's huge, absolutely.
That's huge, that they're learning.
Yeah.
This is good for me to eat. It's okay to have a nibble of that, but not too much.
Yep.
Don't eat that.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, no, it's 100% trained. Not, you know, there's some instinct in there too, but to get those cattle going, it required so much training. And it wasn't me.
Right.
It wasn't me. It was them training each other. So, you know, that was really, the other thing that they really are amiss on is how to be a cohesive member of a herd. And, you know, that I think is instinctually in them as well, just because if you were an outlier and you weren't following the herd, guess what you were? You were meat. You know, you went from auroch or, you know, former bovine into meat land because the predators got you. So because you left the herd. So sometimes that is them observing. Most times it's them observing the cohesiveness of the herd from the ones who had been practiced in it last year. They kind of stick together. They're you know, they're social animals, and there's not many of them that are have antisocial tendencies, but some of them do. And so, you know, I didn't know what we could do about that. So because we'd go on horseback and try to bring them back in. And one day I was out on the hills with this friend of mine. His name is Steve Cody, and he was a direct student of this guy named Bud Williams, a stockmanship expert, who was like a counterintuitive human animal behaviorist. You know, he didn't take a human element into animal behavior. He actually, I think he liked cows better than people. He actually took a cow and sheep mindset into animal behavior. And because of that, a lot of people disregarded him because he was 100% non-traditional cow handling. And it was always on the side of a bovine. Ray Hunt was another guy who actually did the same kind of viewpoint of horses. He actually saw things. He was the greatest horse advocate probably that ever lived. And so what he told me is, Glenn, you're thinking about this all wrong. You can't put them back in the herd. You want to drive them away from the herd. And I said, what are you even talking about, Steve? He said, get on your horse and run them as hard as you can away from the herd, just as hard as you can. And as long as they're looking forward, you just keep running them. You just send them on down their road they want to go, just keep going. But he said the second they turn around to look back, they just do this. You go free. And you just back off all pressure. And he said, I almost guarantee you'll train that animal to never leave that herd again. And what I didn't realize he was doing was he was being a predator. He was being a top of the food chain predator saying, I'm going to cut you out and I'm going to kill you. You know, so all of a sudden that fear instinct comes in. They are prey animals after all. And you're kind of, what you are is confirming that instinctual thought in their mind and saying, yes, that's a right thought. This is actually very dangerous for you to leave the social network of the herd. So anyway, one of my girls this year actually pinned it down. It was Linnea, and created this new idea for us that we now do in spades. You know, so as soon as an animal heads off, we have always a bunch of border collies working with us. She'll send the dogs after him. And, you know, it sounds cruel, but she'll send the dogs after him. And now, guess what? They are actual predator-feeling animals. And these dogs want to go. They just want to go after that recalcitrant steer who doesn't want to have a, social network of the herd to protect them. Because we do have wolves up there. We need this to be intact. We have a lot of wolves up there who would easily take one of these cattle out and enjoy some grass-fed organic beef. So anyway, Linnea sends the dogs after him. There's like 3 dogs after this poor steer who's now like terrified. And the second she sees that animal start circling or turn head back, she'll call the dogs off. And they come. I mean, our dogs are pretty well trained. And they come, they break off. And that cow, that steer, that heifer, whatever it is, runs full speed back to the herd. And you know what? More often than not, we never hear from that one again. They're now adopted into this natural paradigm that was inside them instinctually.
Yeah.
But it took us to kind of reboot that.
Yeah. So we have a situation, being humans, which is interesting because when we stick with the herd, what we're taught is to eat junk food.
Yes.
Right? That's the norm.
Yes.
Is super processed foods that really aren't very good for us.
Yes.
But somehow something strange has happened in our world where you're a wacko if that's not what you want to eat.
Right.
If you put your head down to somebody else's, you're going to come back with Doritos.
Yes. You're right.
What do you think about that? How'd that happen?
You know, have you read this book by Mark Shasker called The Dorito Effect?
I sure have.
Okay, I have too. Mark is actually a really good friend of mine. He and I have actually been on the range together talking about this very thing. He's actually always, looking at these cattle and, applying a lot of these same stories to how cattle work to humans, and how we develop our own palates. But see now, Dave, for 100 years, maybe not quite that much, but 60 or 70 years, our palates have been affected by flavors, by processes on food that are lying to us. And our body is still telling us, yes, they're nutrition, even though there's some compounds placed in there that indicate to our bodies that they're nutrition. But they're not. They're not nutritious at all. Doritos are not nutritious. And there's things in there that say keep eating them, or there's things in us actually that say keep eating them, because actually, the nutritional markers are there. The chemical markers that say this is nutritious food are there, but yet we're never sated because no true nutrition has ever been reached. And our body will tell us when true nutrition's been reached by, saying, yes, I'm satisfied, I'm full, because biochemically, our needs are met. Biochemical needs are not getting met. And as a result, we just keep eating. And this is why obesity. I mean, this is a really simple reason why obesity. It's because our nutritional needs are not getting met, yet our palates are being satisfied. are seeking out of taste. That's why sugar. It's like, yes, adaptively, prehistorically, we are attracted to sweet things simply because of the energy component that they offer us. However, in this day and age, we're surrounded by those kind of options. And, prehistorically, you and I never ate that much sugar. It just wasn't out there in the world. It wasn't in the, my ancestors were brought up on the North Sea, thousands of years. And, guess what? We were eating aurochs, we were eating seafood, we were eating maybe some seaweeds, and maybe some wild berries. There was not much else to eat out there. There was no sweet choices. There was no easy grain choices to eat prehistorically for, my tribal ancestors. And they were healthy. They had good teeth. They were doing great. But now we have an industry that's built on just satisfying the palate and not satisfying our needs. And as a result, here we are.
I thought that story that Kristen Kimball told about the young little girl who was visiting their farm, and she wouldn't eat any of this incredibly good food because it wasn't what she's used to. Just like the cow that you bring in, and they're not used to eating any of these species, and so they're not eating it.
Yes.
And finally
they're not recognizable, right?
Right.
Not even on their radar. As far as, that's not even food. I don't even consider that food, right?
Right. And the little girl was like that. Even strawberries weren't food.
Yes.
And they had to take her to McDonald's 40 miles away to get her to eat.
Right.
And I thought, wow, that's really actually kind of like what you're talking about, except the opposite. It's like taking a smart cow that has a choice of 2,500 species, plant species, and knows how to do it, and they're put in a feedlot.
Yes.
And
we're trying to dumb them down, Dave. We're dumbing them down. And it's 100% nothing to do with their wellness. It's 100% to do with our market. We're just trying to put fat in beef to get marbling and minimize the amount of time they're on feed. So it's all about feed conversion efficiency to fine fat marbling, because that's the premium. USDA choice has got some level of fine fat marbling in that ribeye slice between the 13th and 14th rib on the animal. And when they see that and the grader says USDA choice, they can put stamp on there. Guess what? There's a premium associated with that. So that's the gold standard. They're trying to get that. And it's what we've become, and it's because we're myopic. Instead of thinking of food or thinking of the production of food as actually producing food, instead, 99.9% of the people raising cattle in this country don't ever think of their animal or a piece of their animal entering somebody's house and getting on their table. They think in terms of what the commodity price is right now and what feedlot is going to buy my product, buy my commodity. My commodity. It's not my cow, it's not my steer, it's not my heifer, it's my commodity. So we've just lost touch with the fact that this is going to land on somebody's table, and it's going to be something that we feed people with. And, even the wellness that could come from this product is not even talked about. Like, I was in a discussion with a bunch of Montana ranchers a few weeks ago, and I talked about the nutritional goodness that come from grazing on these wild ranges. And I said, I got a metabolomic researcher, basically studying human nutrient or nutrition and metabolites in human ingested foods. And so he's been sampling beef for years and doing spectrographic analysis on that beef to see what the metabolites are through there, what the nutrient density is, the phytochemicals especially. These are plant compounds that show up in the beef. And he just called me the other day. I've been sending him, he every now and then, once every 2 years or so, he'll say, harvest some animals directly off the range for me. That's our grazing, that wild country grazing, and let's see where we stand. So anyway, he's been texting me every now and then and calling me and say, Glenn, these animals that you're harvesting off the range have an unparalleled amount of phytochemical diversity I'm not seeing it in anybody else's beef. And just last week he called me and said, I got to tell you this is really cool, because this is something people can hang their hat on. And I said, what do you got? And he said, your beef is the only beef I have ever analyzed out of thousands and thousands of samples that has more omega-3 fatty acids in it than omega-6 fatty acids. His name is Stefan Van Vliet, by the way. I want to give him credit because he's doing incredible research that's pretty much not done today. And I think it's almost intentional, because beef, the purveyors of beef in our nation today, there's 4 huge ones that control just about all the flow of protein through this country. They have absolutely 100% no interest in determining the nutrient density of their food that they're serving. It's just not even on the radar. It's unimportant. You know, it's all about production, productivity, and profitability for them, the bottom line in their pocket. But there's nothing about human wellness profitability and human wellness productivity. It's just like the group of ranchers I was talking to. There's no consideration of what the value of this food we're growing is. And so, you know, that was really exciting about the omega-3, because the omega-3 is the cancer-fighting antioxidant compounds, right? These are the things that keep us alive. The omega-6 fatty acids are the things that contribute to, you know, much more risk in our lives and in the human genome.
So the laboratory testing agreed with your tongue.
It agreed with my tongue. Yeah.
Your tongue said this is good.
Yes.
And it also agreed with your mind.
Yes.
Which is like, this all makes sense. This is the right way to do it. Look at the land, yes, which is recovering from being ranched very differently.
Yes.
And now it is abundant.
Yes.
And if you want to talk about carrying capacity, is the carrying capacity going up or down?
Well, it's certainly going up. I should finish the Nicole Masters story. So we're up there and we're finding out that we took 2 areas. We took an area that's still conventionally grazed today, after 150 years, still conventionally grazed, exact same topography, soil mapping unit, the steepness of slope, where the slope faces, distance from water. All these things are the same, which are critical factors in how cows move across the landscape. Anyway, we find out we're 6.4% organic matter on ours versus I think it was 2.2 on the conventionally grazed ones. You know, so when you do that, Dave, you right away can say, oh wait, this is going to support more plants just because of soil organic matter. That's a healthier piece of ground just from a, you know, subsoil standpoint. But when you add another metric she had on there, the plant cover and diversity were also at least 2-fold. So we did these line transects to measure the amount of soil that was actually covered by plants and measure the amount of different plant species that were out there, you know, down to genus and species specific, and come to find out 2 to 3 times more diverse, 2 to 3 times more cover overall.
And 2 times the organic matter.
And 2 times the organic matter, a little over 2.
And how many years did that transformation take? I mean, when
Oh, that was only 10 years. That was only a 10-year difference, yeah. So, and it's so remarkable because this is a xeric environment, right? This is like...
For in an arid environment.
Yes.
For the organic matter to go up to 6%.
Yes.
It's like, let's call the New York Times, right?
No, it's shocking. It's shocking. And, you know, you and I were doing this in the greenhouses today. You know, you can take a handful of this soil on that 6.2 or I think it was 6.4 organic matter, and smell it. And you know, right away, you know, I think a lot of us has lost this as humans due to the Dorito effect. But, you know, when you come back to whole food, your palate, I find my palate sharpens. Everything becomes way more razor sharp than I ever remembered growing up, because I ate a lot of junk food as a kid, you know. It's like, yeah, more is better, you know, or more sugar, you know, simple carbs, give me another pizza, you know. But now I find myself, you know, eating this whole food, especially our beef. I find myself eating way less and actually focusing on the nuance. It's like, wow, that steak tasted a little different than this one. And, you know, Carol and I, my wife, will try to trace it back and say, okay, where was this animal over the past? You know, it was eating more of this type of plant, you know, and you're picking up that nuance, you know. And I never was a nuanced person, but the smell is the same thing, especially when I'm smelling soil. I would smell it before and say, you know, dirt, you know, but now, you know, when you and I are just in the greenhouse there, we're putting a hand up and you got this soil with all this aggregate structure, you know, the aggregate structure. I have the same thing on the range. It's all due to glomalin probably, which is a mycorrhizal fungal component, you know, it's exuded by this mycorrhizae. And when you have glomalin, you have all this clumping, and when you smell that, it's, you know, it's something that goes all the way inside you to your heart. You're like, this resonates. I mean, it's got a resonance to it that like goes into the core of our being, of who we are as humans. And I don't know why. I don't think we're supposed to eat dirt. And we're not supposed to eat soil either, you know. But we know what good soil smells like. That's in us for some reason. And we know what bad soil smells like. And so when I put my hand on that range, you know, we're at 6.4, and I smell that. It's a different smell than I smelled in your tomatoes. But it's a smell that says, yeah, this resonates. This is healthy soil.
So you just mentioned heart, and, you know, we talked about mind and the senses and the lab test, and then heart. And I think it's worth mentioning that heart is part of this. When you talked about when that really deeply intuitive organic inspector, the one really great one,
yeah,
and he was talking about heart.
Yeah.
And he just knew.
Yes.
Right?
He knew.
He knew.
Yeah.
And you know, standards are the best we can do in terms of how do we do this on a
broad brush approach.
Right. We're trying to lift up.
And we're stuck there.
And we're stuck
there.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot of people, you know, and we have a lot of country to cover as organic inspectors, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, you went to Montana and you talked to some people and you described what you do. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty amazing what you do. And look at the metrics. I mean, it's not like this isn't just singing a song that might be true or might not, but you have measurements to prove it.
Yeah.
Before I finish this question, carrying capacity, like that range that was the traditional grazing.
Yes. Does
that sustain more animals per acre than the way you're doing it?
No, I mean you mean before I started doing this grazing?
No, I mean now compared.
Now, oh, absolutely, yeah, 100%.
So the land actually becomes more productive.
Absolutely. I mean, I just told you it's like over twice the cover, right? Over twice the plant diversity.
Right.
That plant cover is there, you know. So yes, 100%. We could run way more cattle than we do.
And so everything is working better.
Yes.
And what was the response of a bunch of ranchers who weren't doing this to hearing about it? Did they go, God, tell us more?
So you know what the crisis in thought for me is, you know, after talking to a lot of those folks is, you know, and I can't say categorical because you know, at the end of a discussion, and I don't know, it was almost like, it was like this spiritual thing almost because, you know, I'd give the presentation, but afterwards in the hallway, I got 3 or 4 people saying, wait, let me get this straight. I want to know more, you know. But in the room, in the group setting, they wouldn't ask the question. Okay, so that was happening. So there is that. So it's not like everybody's crazy and they won't listen to new ideas, you know, but some people are really uncomfortable about raising their hand in a situation and saying, I'm going to ask a question to a weird guy now.
Nobody wants to be separated from the herd.
No,
it's
you're
dangerous.
Right. You're right. It's very dangerous.
Right?
You might get eaten by the wolves, right?
That's right.
So anyway, there that was going on. But here's the weird thing that really kind of troubled me. I broke it down into economic terms, Dave. I didn't just talk about, hey, there's more grass out there. I actually went to ADGs, which is the metric All ranchers talking, or most do. If they don't, they're in trouble because they're not making money. That's for certain, because they don't care about this.
What's an
They're in
ADG?
trouble. Average daily gain.
Okay.
It's how many pounds a day you gain on your animals.
Yeah.
And I talked about how grazing this way actually bumped our ADGs up and was making us $120,000 more a grazing season than we were before. I mean, it's $120,000 found money, okay? Because a bunch of them said, hey, how do you pay, some of these people? And it's like, no, you can pay these people. You can totally pay these people because you're making more money. You're making more money when you reboot this in these animals and recreate this herd instinct, and you're taking them to better grass, and they're not ending up in some bottom of a canyon somewhere grazing out all the creekside vegetation, which we call riparian vegetation, and then they just stay there. Because these cows are creatures of habit. They don't say to themselves, oh, all the grass is gone, let's go back up to the high country. No, they just stay there for the rest of the summer and continue to pulverize it. They start eating woody plants, and guess what? They're not beavers. They can't digest woody plants very well. As a result, they start losing weight, and your ADGs just drop precipitously. So I brought up all the metrics, unlike what the Real Organic Project discussion at Churchtown. I didn't bring up any economics, but to me, as a cattle guy, as a rancher, we're profitable on our place, and as a result, I have to, I always engage in the metrics of what the outcomes are, to see if this is worth it as a business as well. Because, we all try to run these ecological things, and we all try to run, especially as organic, we all try to run, trying to be in concert with nature. But if we're not profitable, it doesn't mean anything, because we're going to disappear. We're all going to disappear, okay? So we have to be profitable. So I bring up all these profitability metrics, and that's the thing that bothered me, Dave, is that I didn't have any takers. I'm talking about the money here, guys, and I have no takers. And the paradigm shift is just wild. It's because tribalism in agriculture is so real and so pervasive. It's a gridlock. It's handcuffs. And there's so many people tied into it that, I've seen it in the Midwest. I used to work in corn and soybean operations, and I saw family farms just die. They just imploded. They got sold to, ADM or Bill Gates or somebody who was buying all kinds of cropland. And it was because they couldn't escape the handcuffs of peer pressure. I mean, literally peer pressure we're talking about. It's not even so much bullying. I mean, there's some of that goes on in agriculture, but it's just the peer pressure. I'm going to go to church this weekend. What are my neighbors going to say after church? Or I'm at the coffee shop. I knew ranchers like that. Like I knew this one guy, actually when I was working in the Corn Belt, he was trying to raise corn organically. And he was lost. He was doing... he didn't have the knowledge we had today. This is like way back in the 70s, and he's trying to grow these corn crops. He's got ragweed, he's got all these weeds all over it, and he doesn't really, nobody had really thought about cover crops, and of course, stuff like rolling crops down with a roller crimper, all the things that are technological advances in organic agriculture in the Midwest today. He didn't have any of those tools in his toolbox. He just knew it wasn't right to be bathing his land with chemicals. He undertook an incredible amount of ridicule across the board from all the neighbors. I knew it for a fact because I saw it happening. They laughed at him. They just laughed at him over it. His family was embarrassed. They were hurt. And so this kind of, we're here, we're here in agriculture, and we're at a place where peer pressure is perhaps more intense than in any other business.
Let me ask you a question. So I get that. That there can be this habit. They become these tunnels that we live in, and we don't dare leave the tunnel because maybe the wolves will get us. Who knows?
Yes.
We can't stand to be isolated from the community. But I'm curious if the tunnels got built by people who were making a buck off of putting up the tunnels. In other words, there's a lot of money being made in agriculture, not by the ranchers, not by the farmers, by and large. By and large, it's by the processors, the consolidators, the seed merchants, the chemical merchants, the fertilizer salespeople. I'm just curious, do you think, is that a big part of building this culture? Or do you feel like that's not really that important to it? It just happened.
Well, it's certainly a big part of how things happen, but if we step back just 120, 150 years in agriculture and look at who we sold our products to and how we sold our products, real connectivity with food, Farmer Abe Schmidt over there would sell a quarter beef to Gus Brown, or maybe it's hanging on the rail, and maybe Gus is going to cut it up in his kitchen. The year's 1872. Gus eats some meat from that beef, goes over to Abe and says, this is really tough. I don't want another beef from you again this way. And Abe's like, oh man, I'm sorry, you're my neighbor. Take this one instead. So there's this direct line of accountability. Because remember what we're doing? We're growing food, right? So now that doesn't exist anymore. So yeah, absolutely 100%. That has, I wouldn't say everything to do with it, but it has a lot to do with where we are today and why, there's that ridicule. So, but the ridicule, I think, also has to do with threatening. I think people who are conventional around us feel threatened when we do something different. Because with tribalism, even toxic tribalism is a fear to step out. And they feel threatened when people do. And, it's just deep in the human psyche to be part of a tribe. And when somebody steps out, even if it's for a good reason, there's threatening there. Because, with that, immediately, you have to consider the paradigm you're in. You have to consider whether or not you're in the right spot. People don't like doing that. They like to be comfortable. And it's, I don't know if you're familiar with Rick Clark. I was on a podcast with him, I think with Acres or something like that a bunch of years ago. I wasn't with him. He was previous to me, and I watched his podcast. Anyway, here's a guy that was 100% conventional corn and bean farmer in Indiana, and he's sacrificed some yields. He's 100% organic, sacrificed quite a bit of yield. He's down to like 145 bushels. And I looked at the comments on one of the articles that was published about him online. And people are absolutely like 100% saying, this guy's not even legit. He's only getting 145 bushels. But Rick's platform says, okay, I may be getting losses in production or reduced production. He wouldn't go losses, he would say reduced production. But yet my cost structure is like entirely different now. And because of that, I'm hugely profitable, because he's dropped all the costs, chemicals, fertilizer, anhydrous, even diesel. He's got less passes over the fields. Yet the guy's driving new John Deere equipment. He's not driving some hippie, like cobbled together organic, stereotypical equipment. He's got nice equipment, it's all GPS driven, and he's always innovating on this stuff. But that's not legitimate to people. His successes aren't legitimate to people because Rick only gets 145 bushels. Where if you get under 200 in that area of the Midwest, I used to work there, well, you're not legit. You're not a legit. I mean, I'd see people at the coffee shop even lie about their yield. Yeah, we got 200. Yeah, good to go, And because the stigma of getting less than 200 was too much to bear. So here's Rick, announcing on national interviews that he's getting 145 bushels. And he loses 100% legitimacy to his friends and neighbors, who are conventionally practicing around him, because they can't even conceptualize how they tell their neighbor what they got if it's 145. So the peer pressure is extreme. And that's why people don't adopt, because it's so extreme. And it's ironic to me, Dave, because they're going to lose their place, right?
Right.
Because they're sacrificing profitability for peer, And, they may leave the keys on the table, but you know what? They're not going to consider themselves culpable. They're going to say it was the market. They're going to say it was real estate prices. They're going to say couldn't afford equipment anymore. They're going to say all these things when actually they were 100% control of their destiny, because they could have invested in an operation that was much lower cost, and they'd be surviving today.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to do about it, because it's psychological, social. And maybe we should get your wife Claudia to counsel them all out of these things, But I don't really.
These are real issues and they're not just about this; they're about everything.
Yes, I mean maybe it's just organic.
Where
just that alone is stigma enough.
That's right, and in so many places in our lives, we're afraid.
Yes.
We don't admit it. We don't talk about it. Maybe we feel some anxiety, but we're actually afraid to do the thing that we actually, if we sat down, we think it must be the right thing. What you just described must be a better way of doing it. I actually didn't hear any downside. Yeah. I only heard upside after upside after upside. We didn't even.
Well, there's a lot of physical work. I will say that.
It is a lot.
100%, and there's a lot of people who resist that.
Yeah.
They don't like that. It's actually, we're talking physical here. We're not talking tractor. We're not talking, diesel burning. We're not talking pistons and machinery and stuff like that. We're talking.
Because human beings are herding these cattle.
They're out there actually doing the work.
Right.
They're on horseback. They got to get a relationship with not only themselves and the crew, so they don't fight up there in cow camp, but they got to actually build a relationship and trust with a horse.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that, you don't have anything. They're the wheels underneath you that's going to make this happen. And then they actually have to really develop this passionate relationship for these cattle and the food they produce. Yeah, it's so, somebody wrote me that online the other day. It's like, tell me about how you feel about, where your beef goes and how it ends up on somebody's plate. And I'm like, when I'm looking at the animal, when I'm looking at the steer, I'm riding behind them. I am actually thinking forward to that time when this animal, this beautiful animal, is going to become food. And I want it to be the very best. I want it to be the very best experience you've ever had with food. And, I know you think that way with a tomato. I see the way you're looking at these things and handing them, here, try this one. And it's because that they're not a commodity tomato, that you want somebody to be super happy when they have this. And you want them to be blessed not only with happiness, but you want them to be blessed with wellness, right? Yeah. Because you want the best for that person, and that's exactly the way I think about, the food we produce. It's not only the relationship with all these attributes I talked about, it's a relationship with the people. The eaters, they're our partners. We don't even call them customers. I don't allow my crew to call them customers ever. They are not customers. They are partners. They are partners in this whole process of what we do.
I like that.
And that's exciting.
I'm going to be talking about partners from now on.
They are our
who
partners.
Eat our tomatoes.
They are so huge, because without them, we have nothing, right?
That's right.
And we're cognizant, even they're cognizant. I watch the stickers get put on those little boxes and the larger tomatoes, and it is you, Dave. It is you, Dave. And when they see that, it's very clear. Hey, this tomato, I'm a partner with this grower. Especially when they find out, oh my gosh, it actually tastes like a tomato.
Yeah.
It's a revolution, when they actually taste this thing for the first time and say, wait.
I liked your face.
This got tomato flavor.
You were ready to be polite. You were ready to go, oh, that's very good. And you were like, oh, that really is very good.
And it was even one that wasn't perfectly finalized right. We said, oh, it's still going to taste like, and I was like, yeah, right, Dave, wonderful. And I'm like, kind of hedging my bets, trying to put on the perfect face. And it was not hard because it was like, holy cow, that's a tomato.
Yeah.
So, and it's because they're on soil.
Yeah.
And it's a living soil.
Glenn, we can't stop, but we have to stop. I know you have to do some business, so I'm going to ask we continue this in the morning.
Yeah, that's
Would
cool.
you be willing to have round two?
Yeah, it's cool. It's got to be early though.
Okay.
Because I gotta be on that aircraft at 5, and this is Newark.
Yeah, I don't want
So
you
it
to
could
miss
be,
anything.
Could be combat. So,
Okay.
Yeah, no, let's do it.
So
Okay?
thank you very
Okay?
much for part one,
bet.
and
It was a lot of fun.
yeah, we'll go.
No, I could talk about this till I'm blue in the face.
Yeah, yeah.
Because
Well, I
this
could
stuff,
too.
it's like you with the tomatoes, Dave. It's like, this excites me, you know? And it's because we got this thing in our bloodstream, right? It isn't just, it's commodity, not bringing coming in, you know, and then we put these inputs on there, and then the inputs are going up, you know, and there's not, you don't have all those things. You're like, no. You know what it is? I think it's the core of our thing. It's a relationship. We have a relationship, you know, with these animals, with the land. You got a relationship with your soil. You're lifting up and smelling it, and I can still see your face light up when you smell that smell, you know. It's because it's in your bloodstream. It's part of who you are. And that's exciting.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.